during the keynote, I saw that there was an example of OpenClaw working through a robotics task with a gripper, not only running simulations, but also changing the physical design in CAD as well.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the really great part about OpenClaw is that it's able to ingest tribal knowledge from really anywhere. You can give it the most obscure knowledge, most obscure documentation, and it will help you make sense of it, and you can help it make sense of it. So it's a collaboration. As an example, one of the projects that I worked on early when I first started working with OpenClaw is actually training a battle bot. And I've never used Isaac Sim. I thought it was really interesting, but it's just never been in my wheelhouse, and I really wanted to see how far I could push OpenClaw in the use cases for robotics. So OpenClaw designed a little robot with a claw on the end of it, and I was like, okay, this is cool.
That's fitting.
Yeah, right. I was like, why'd you put the? I asked it. I said, why is there a claw? He's like, I'm a lobster, and I was like, okay, whatever. So it's got 2 tracks, some armor, and an arm with a claw on it. I said, okay, well, let's go ahead and train this thing. And then it just asked me specifics, like how do you want it to attack? How do you want it to move? How much do you want it to weigh? And I asked these very simple, answered these very simple questions, and it came up with a training policy for that robot. And I said, go ahead, let's train it and see what happens. I thought that I was just going to get nothing, this robot that just dragged its arm around and drove off the edge of a cliff. But instead, it actually started adjusting the training policy over time with batch size, number of environments, and then the objects that it was supposed to attack and the rewards for each one of those and those actions that it was creating. So over time, OpenClaw actually self-evolved my training loop for the BattleBot, and then it just turned into an angry little gremlin running around slapping things out of the air.
That's awesome.
So it's a great use case, especially for beginners like myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned that it came up with the design,
yeah.
In this case tracked with the claw. During the training process, was the design fixed? And as a second question, when coming up with that design, did it go through iterations, or did it just pick this and focus more on the control part of it as opposed to the physical design?
It did, it had some iterations. The first iteration basically looked like a floor jack. And I said, that's not going to work. There's 2 wheels, there's no servos, it's a floor jack. And it was like, okay, well, how do you want it to look? And I described how I wanted it to look. I want it to look like a little tank with a hammer on it. And we went through probably 4 or 5 iterations, and then worked out the places where movement would happen, servos, the weights, whether or not it would have wheels or tracks. And the OpenClaw and I worked together to design that robot. And then as training progressed, it started identifying bugs in our design where the arm was too long and the amount of power that we gave to the servo to actually lift it up wasn't enough. So it's like, okay, we're going to change that out. Do you want to do that? And I said, yes, of course. Let's continue to train, and then we came up with the final design together.
That's very cool. So then, something I'm curious about, you mentioned going through design iterations. As opposed to just building design for simulation, have you ever used the OpenClaw for designing something to manufacture? For example, going through the process of making technical documentation, assembly considerations, like where we might even source supplies. And can you tell me a bit more about how an application like that could be developed to make the physical AI truly physical?
So I haven't gone through anything physical, but in the experience that I've had working with OpenClaw, really it would come down to being able to provide it with the context necessary to be able to source those paths to be able to pull in logistics. And then also to do comparative studies of products like it.